Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today I am talking about the US government because the US government, and I quote, does not have a view into foreign hacking campaigns domestically, and that's a rather serious problem. Now, here's what's going on. This is coming from Cyberscoop and some other outlets as well. Now, if you've been wondering how the heck the United States government could have missed both the SolarWinds data breach, which just got everybody hacked from multiple federal governments to Fortune 100 companies worldwide, and also the Microsoft Exchange server hacking incident, basically, which hit tens of thousands of email servers worldwide for the government and outside the government as well. And both of these were caught after this entire malicious activity is underway. You're actually not alone in wondering how the heck that happened, how the US government with all of its intelligence apparatus simply didn't catch this until well after it was going through. Now, National Security Agency, or NSA Director General Paul Nakasone, actually talked about this exact issue today on Capitol Hill in testimony, and I'm going to quote him quite a bit here because he lays all of this out. And to start, and I quote, "It's not the fact we can't connect the dots, we can't see all the dots. We have a difficulty as a government understanding the totality of the actual intrusion." Now, General Nakasone acknowledged that the US government, including the NSA, does not have a view into foreign hacking campaigns when they exploit domestic internet infrastructure. Now, the suspected Russian and Chinese attackers behind the SolarWinds supply chain attack and the hacking stemming from the Microsoft Exchange server vulnerabilities, respectively, basically, they used US computers and servers to launch their operations. But here's the thing. It's an indication to some, including White House officials, that the intruders deliberately sought to bypass detection by the US intelligence community, essentially to hit the private sector. Private sector entities, not the US government, revealed the existing of these hacking operations. If you recall, SolarWinds is a private organization, as is Microsoft. FireEye was the one that detected that and basically brought that to the world, the SolarWinds one, and then obviously Microsoft did their own work. Now, one of the issues is how U.S. intelligence agencies are actually mandated to work. For example, the National Security Agency, which is the United States' Foreign Signals Intelligence Agency, is typically barred from operating domestically, and it lacks the authority to track civilian private networks in the United States, whether they're internet service providers or the Wi-Fi in your house. Now, regarding this whole situation, Nakasone, said, and I'm going to quote a lot here as I mentioned, and let's get going, "We have an inability to see everything. Our adversaries understand that they can come into the US and rapidly use an internet service provider, come up and do their activities and take that down before a warrant can be issued, before we can have surveillance by a civilian authority in the US. It's not necessarily that it's US Cyber Command or National Security Agency that needs to be doing this. It's just that the nation needs an ability to see what's going on within the US. What we've seen from both the SolarWinds and Microsoft intrusions is an increasing level of sophistication. This is a scope, a scale, a level of sophistication we haven't seen previously. This isn't simply email phishing attempts. How do we take the best tools not only from the government, but also from the private sector to look at what's occurring and being able to shine that spotlight? I think a lot of times we look and just say, we'll simply go ahead and downgrade that intelligence rapidly. Sometimes the better answer is, okay, where are there other streams of information and how can we use that? Now, I end quote. Nakasone also suggested that incentives for the private sector could be introduced, adding that legislation could push private sector internet infrastructure to better understand, basically the ISPs, to better understand who their customers are. And I think there's a couple of points that I'd like to make here regarding this situation, because when you were looking at this, and that is basically the sounding cry of a lot of people when something major happens. How could the U.S. government not basically get the intelligence and stop something like a 9/11 from happening, back in 2001, or in this case, cyber incidents when we have potential state-sponsored attackers crawling through infrastructure that are going back and forth through everywhere? I think those are valid questions. But I think, and this is my first point here, is that one of the things that needs answering is why the federal government's own internal threat detection, and they have their own, it's called Einstein, and it's administered by the CISA, that's the cybersecurity wing of the Department of Homeland Security. why didn't Einstein catch possible malicious SolarWinds traffic? No system is perfect, so I think having a good understanding of where this can be strengthened and also what went wrong is beyond important. As we were looking at this, the SolarWinds, and the reason why I excluded Microsoft from this is that essentially in the SolarWinds breach, the attackers were using SolarWinds' own protocol called the OIP to basically move traffic back and forth. And so all the threat detections, both in the private sector and the public sector, like Einstein, missed this. And I think that is going to be a really good understanding of how we up and improve the game for threat detection as we are passing traffic back and forth, even as it's looking seemingly legitimate. The second point I'd like to make is that I don't think that we want or need to expand government surveillance into every corner of our internet connections and private corporations here in the United States. But what we can do is mandate compliance for data security, cybersecurity, and also software development to ensure that these problems are mitigated vastly in the future. Now, if you're not aware, the Department of Defense here in the United States has already taken the first steps with this with the CMMC, or the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And despite all of the headaches and problems with that rollout, it rolled out in 2020 and it has been a mess. We basically have been mired in that as well. In the long run, it's these kinds of standards and practices that all organizations need to put into place to be secure. The defense industrial base, which is those private corporations that essentially get those contracts from the DoD, is 300,000 companies that are basically going to have to adhere to certain levels of cybersecurity compliance for certification in order to work with the DoD that essentially protects the Department of Defense's supply chain. And I think that's going to be starting to be rolled out. The Department of Homeland Security, for example, the Department of Treasury, state, and on and on and on. And then local government, such as state, city, municipal, county, all of those could start having these kinds of standards that would require any kind of business that is operating or maintaining, let's say, data such as personally identifiable information to basically have a cybersecurity plan in place and be certified from it. And I'm not saying you have to break the bank to do this. I think it's one of those things that is essentially required to operate in this day and age. If you absolutely love technology, and you should embrace it, you also understand it has to be married to cybersecurity. And the last point I want to make is that the goal, I think, should be to balance the required privacy that we all need, in our lives, with the ability to stop threats before they get to our computers and devices by whatever means. It's a very difficult tightrope to walk, but sometimes, it can absolutely be done. And I think that's one of those times where we were looking at this and saying, okay, maybe our internet service providers, as I'm connecting to, Verizon or T-Mobile or AT&T or Comcast or Time Warner, maybe they are required to have more enterprise level threat detection as things are getting, passing back and forth to us. This doesn't necessarily stop, us from going wherever it is we want to go. But let's say we are trying to download that malicious file and we simply don't understand that, or we're not properly trained to understand what a phishing website looks like, et cetera, et cetera. Now we have a modicum of defense where we previously didn't. And I'm not saying we have to turn into a giant nanny state for cyber threat here, but we really need to up this game. And a lot of countries have basically created national cyber awareness programs and strategies and all of this, whether it's identifying fake information or fake websites that could be phishing or malicious or otherwise. These are things that we need to address because we are living in this era. We are living in the era of the criminal hacker, and quite frankly, SolarWinds and Microsoft, I think, are not the only ones. We could have this going on right now. It's simply not discovered yet. And there are going to be other platforms and software developers like the SolarWinds of the world that might be running fast and loose. And even when they're warned in audits, they still do it. This is a very serious problem. And I think we need to step up our game. And so as we are looking at this, the U.S. intelligence simply does not have an understanding of essentially foreign operations digitally, electronically over the internet here while they're sitting in the United States. And I think that's of serious concern, but I don't think it's 100% on them. I think we all have to pull together. We all have to improve our cyber hygiene, and it starts with our corporations, and it starts with us, and it starts with education. And that is your news of the day. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, and please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, everyone.